What is this?
A knife.
What's it called?
Let's go, honey.
Hello everyone, the professor here. This is the Columbia River Knife and Tool, or CRKT Hootenanny. This is actually the second Hootenanny that I've handled. The first Hootenanny I had came with some stripped out screws, and I contacted the seller and had them send a replacement, and the replacement screws are fine. But fair warning, they use cheap screws, and there's an increased chance that yours may be stripped out. Relative sizing. Here is the Ontario Knife Company Rat Model 2, which as you can see is shorter. Slightly shorter, the Benchmade 551 Griptilian. Then on the larger side, you have the Rat Model 1, very similar in total length, but just a hair longer. The Spyderco Endura 4 is also longer. And of course, ZT0452 carbon fiber, quite a bit longer. Absolute blade length, you were looking at right about 3 1/8 inches or so. This knife doesn't have a lot of variance, honestly. Made in China using 8CR13 MOV steel, which is not marked on the blade, and designed by Hootenanny, and utilizes the IKBS Comacore bearing system. And it is also known as K300KXP. And MSRP is around $69.99, but on Amazon you can usually find this for under $40, as well as a few other places. This is a Hootenanny design, and it has a lot of sweeping curves that are somewhat characteristic of some of his other designs. A drop point shape, and you can see the grind on it swoops up to this wedge up here. It is about 0.128 inches thick at the top and in the body of the pocket. The majority of it is right around 0.437 to 0.44 or so. If you look at the thickest point, which is at the IKBS bump right here, you're looking at more like 0.53-ish. Folded length, just under 4 3/4, or maybe call it 4 5/8. This is on IKBS, which means there are 9 bearings, I believe, inside of this, and I have taken this unit apart and added a little bit of oil to them. And those bearings give this a very smooth action. The flipping on this may be a little difficult for someone who's new at it, but once you get used to it, it's very easy. And if it's a little too tight, you can always loosen the pivot and tape down the IKBS so it won't free rotate. With a little bit of loosening and making sure that you got some lubrication on the bearings inside the IKBS, this is a very smooth knife. In fact, this is one of the smoothest actions I've experienced, and certainly one of the smoothest under $50. Also, listen to that sound. Just that metal clang when this thing flips and fires out of there. So nice. It is a frame lock, as you can see here. Although, interestingly enough, these overlays somewhat hide the frame, but you can see the metal frame is actually what stops this, and it does meet the edge, so it is a frame lock and not a liner lock. These overlays are glass-filled nylon, and the body is steel. Really, it has a nice color palette to it. And to complete the aesthetic, you've got this little curved tail, which is held by 2 T6 screws and is stuck, only used for right-hand tip up, and there are no holes at the top or on the other side. However, that clip carries very deeply. Look at that. That minimal amount is all that's left exposed. You're looking at right at maybe 3/8 of an inch. So this carries quite deep. And this clip, not only does it carry deep, but because of the weight of this thing, which is right at 4.66 ounces, or 132 grams, the Hootenanny is going to stay where you put it. And this short clip is sufficient. And this guy has a rather interesting disassembly. Once you remove these overlays, which by the way are held on by 6 T6 screws, and then a couple more over here over the clip on this side. Once you remove these overlays, it reveals a couple more T6 screws per side in the metal frame, which then have to be unscrewed. So basically, to take this apart, you need a T6 and a T9 for the pivot. One semi-negative that I will point out about the clip is it has a tendency to rise up a little bit higher if you put it in against denim multiple times. This clip here wants to move away. You could take care of this. You could remove this clip and bend this down more so it's applying more direct pressure onto here, but just something to keep in mind. Styrofoam is not the best cutting board, but utility is brought down by the fact that this is using 8CR13 MOV. There was an alternate version of this that was supposed to have a better steel, but then some people did some testing and realized that the steel that they said it wasn't actually the steel that it was made of. So there's some controversy there. But this is just begging for a better steel. If this were in, I don't know, S35VN or S110V or Maximate or any sort of higher end super steel, this would be an amazing knife, because the action is so good and the ergonomics are so good, and they do so many things well with this knife, if only they didn't use such cheap materials. And I mean that in terms of the blade steel, 8CR13 MOV, and the screws that, as I mentioned, we had some problem with some of them stripping. But because of that, utility-wise, I can only give this a score of 3 or below average. Awesomeness, though, I'm going to give this a score of 5. This is a pretty awesome knife. That sound alone, the flipping action, the overlays over the steel frame, the locking mechanism and how clean it is, the design, the shape, the jimping. I mean, there's so many things this knife does well. The clip, how classy and clean it is. Awesomeness, definitely a 5. This is a very cool knife. So I'm going to give it a 5 in awesomeness. Cost, again, MSRP is around $70, but you can find this under $40, so it is in the economy tier. You're usually going to get this for under $40. And in fact, I wouldn't pay more than $40 for a knife that is in 8CR13 MOV. This is about the highest dollar knife that I'm going to spend that kind of money on with that blade steel. Weight at 4.66 ounces. This is a little bit heavier of a knife. It is just inside the category 2 weight. Ergonomics is where this knife really shines, in my opinion. There are so many good grips you can put on the Hootenanny. The pretty standard grip is to do something like this and put your thumb up here. This jimping sits really nicely ergonomically. You can also choke up on this because you do have this finger choil with jimping, so that you can have your knife like this. You can move your thumb up here and touch this jimping here and do more of a downward slice, and your finger is not likely to get cut. There's a little divot there to protect your fingers while you're slicing. You could hold this with this sort of grip, put a finger here and do a slice across like that. And of course, you can do a backhand grip like this, where you put your pinky inside of that finger notch and hold it more like this and rest your middle finger just inside the swerve of the clip here for a stabbing motion if you wanted to use this thing in self-defense. That's as far as I'm going to talk about that issue with this knife, but I'll bring it up because it is just one more utilizable grip for this thing. Also affecting ergonomics is in the pocket. Look at how thin this is. If it were a little lighter weight, this thing would be even more awesome. carryable knife, but even as is, it's pretty darn good. So I give this an ergonomic score of great, which means I rate it as even more ergonomic than the Benchmade Griptilian, which is 2 cost tiers ahead in terms of pricing. This is a tier 4 cost, and this is only a tier 6, and yet ergonomically, I think this knife is better. It's certainly thinner. And lastly, Legality. Again, this blade is about 3.25 inches in total length, which is going to put you right here at 4 in terms of legality. It is not an assisted knife, it's not an automatic knife, and it's not gravity fed. As you can see, you can't knock this thing loose. So this gets a legality of 4. So value on the Hootenanny comes out to utility times awesomeness over 9 minus cost, or 3 times 5 over 9 minus 6, which comes out to 15 over 3, or a value of 5. So in conclusion, there are only a handful of negative things I can say about this, starting with the cheap materials, which include the screws that may or may not strip out, and the 8CR13 MOV blade steel. Then you can also ding it a little bit for the locked into right-hand tip-up carry, the clip that starts to peel away, so slight negatives there, but the action, the ergonomic feel, the design, and there's so much done right. This is essentially the nicest knife in 8CR13 MOV steel that I've ever handled. And again, this is just begging for a better steel. And if they release a premium version of this with a super steel, I'm going to be really tempted to give it a chance. This version alone, I think for the price, if you can find it under $40, it is a great knife. And between 40 and 45, still a pretty good deal. I've been very happy with this knife, the second one I received. And I find myself carrying it more and more happily than I have with any other knife with 8CR13 MOV or AUS8 or 440C or any steel that's in sort of that tier. I'd have to say, among the more budget steels, the CRKT Hootenanny is definitely a favorite. That's all for today. Class dismissed.